on A&E. After an Army hearing in October 1970 cleared Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald of killing his family, he received an honorable discharge and moved to Southern California. There, he settled into a job as Director of Emergency Medicine at a Long Beach hospital.
I sort of came to a conclusion that I have to keep my sanity, I have to be as good an emergency physician as I can be, and hopefully I can rebuild my life. I don't think it's wrong to rebuild your life after a tragedy, and I refuse to apologize for that. I will never apologize for that.
His wife's relatives didn't find it so easy to put the murders behind them. The Army's failure to find the killers especially angered Colette's stepfather, Freddie Kassab. Barred from most of the Army hearing, his information had come from MacDonald, who was reluctant to speak about that night.
He said it was too hard for him to talk about it, and the Army just didn't tell us anything. So we went on what we knew of the boy at the time, which was nothing but good, and we'd known him since he was 14 years old, and we proceeded from there.
After the hearing, Kassab requested a copy of the court transcripts from MacDonald, but he kept finding excuses not to send it. Kassab began to believe that MacDonald did not care about finding the killers.
I mean, after all, you just don't go about your life and walk away with it, seemingly uncaring and all the rest of it. I mean, they couldn't understand that.
Kassab grew increasingly suspicious of MacDonald and started to record their phone conversations. On November 18th, 1970, MacDonald phoned Kassab and boasted that together with some Green Beret buddies, he had tracked down and killed one of the hippie attackers.
Did you get what I meant before?
Yeah, I got what you meant.
All right.
I didn't say anything, but I got what you meant.
But that's for real.
Yeah, good. Good.
I don't know. Didn't really change anything.
And what I did was, in retrospect, it's really crazy. And I can't explain why I did it except as this awkward and really stupid attempt to somehow assuage their grief a little and get them past step one in overcoming their own grief. And I said to him, Freddie, look, you don't have to worry about it anymore. We got one of them. And he sounded overjoyed.
In fact, Kassab didn't believe this story. He began to think that if MacDonald could lie about this, then maybe he was also lying about the terrible night when his family was killed. Finally, on Christmas Eve, 1970, MacDonald let Kassab have his copy of the Army hearing transcript. Kassab studied it meticulously and was disturbed by the contradictions he found in his son-in-law's story. Army investigators allowed Freddie Kassab to go back to the apartment on Castle Drive. It had been sealed since the night of the murders. What he found was chilling. There seemed to be no evidence of any outside assailants.
Drug addicts running crazy in that house, killing. Don't leave one single clue in the house. The hall closet, which was open, was full of drugs. There is not a drug addict in the world that's going to pass up hypodermic needles and syringes and walk out of a house. There was nothing stolen out of that house.
Most disturbing was the evidence from the site where Jeffrey MacDonald said he struggled with the attackers. His blood and fibers from his pajamas had been found on all three victims, but none were found in the living room.
Not one thread or not one fiber. 19 stab wounds. How does a man get stabbed 19 times and not bleed? There is not one drop of his blood in that living room anywhere.
Kassab's personal investigation led him to a devastating conclusion.
His whole story is a complete fabrication. You have to say to yourself, why would a man who claims to have loved his children and his wife beyond anything in this world lie about such an occurrence?
Kassab was convinced that MacDonald was the killer. The case, however, was officially closed. Kassab started an aggressive campaign to have it reopened. He was turned away by the Army and Justice Department, so he started lobbying members of Congress. Finally, in January 1971, the Army agreed to take another look and requested that the FBI crime lab reanalyze the evidence. On June 1st, 1972, after an 18-month investigation, the Army produced a 3,000-page report on its findings. The Army conceded that mistakes had been made, but declared that based on FBI analysis, much of the crucial evidence was intact.
There was an awful lot of blood evidence, awful lot of hair and fiber evidence, none of which was lost or contaminated because of these actions by military policemen and criminal investigators or the medics that come in.
The FBI had also found that there was no evidence of a break-in, and all the weapons in the assault had come from the house. The reinvestigation changed the Army's position on the MacDonald case. The Army now concluded that the only possible assailant was the only person left alive at the scene.
Jeffrey got a fair investigation. He murdered Colette. He murdered Kimmy. He murdered Chrissy. He knows he murdered him. I know he murdered him.
Jeffrey MacDonald knew that the investigation was going on and says he and his lawyer had a bad feeling about it even before the report was released.
You're keeping up this front, and yet you're in this struggle for your life and your livelihood and your reputation and the memory of your family. It's a very bad time. We had this terrible feeling deep in our guts that this was real, everything had really gone sour, and that these guys were not looking for the truth.
MacDonald was now a civilian, so the Army could no longer prosecute him. Since the crime had been committed on federal property, jurisdiction fell to the U.S. Justice Department. But when the government failed to move quickly, Freddie Kassab himself filed a complaint against MacDonald before a federal judge. In August 1974, MacDonald was called before a federal grand jury in North Carolina. After 6 months of testimony, he was indicted on 3 counts of murder.